It is one of the worst scenes of mass slaughter ever unearthed. An apex predator, a panicked stampede, and a natural disaster all collided in a perfect storm. Now, a new discovery reveals the giant prehistoric monster at the center of it all. An Arctic dinosaur. They're the Earth's first fighters, the ultimate predators. New discoveries in forensic science bring to life the prehistoric art of war. This is Jurassic Fight Club. It happened about 70 million years ago. At the top of the world, the first ice caps are formed, reaching down to what is now modern-day Canada. South of the Arctic Circle, incredibly, the land is inhabited by dinosaurs. Winter cloaks the terrain in total darkness. Snow and ice force dinosaurs to migrate into modern-day Canada to escape the harsh conditions. As they head southward, they're chased by two killers. One is an apex predator. The other is the disintegration of the Arctic world. Summer 1986, Pipestone Creek in northwest Alberta, Canada. A team of paleontologists on a routine dig make a startling discovery. It's the remains of an entire herd of dinosaurs. Over 3,500 bones, with up to 100 bones packed in per square meter and including 14 skulls in total. It is one of the most spectacular finds in dinosaur history. They quickly identify the dinosaurs as Pachyrhinosaurus, heavily skulled predecessors of Triceratops. A typical adult measured about 23 feet long, stood about 7 feet tall, and weighed as much as 4 tons.
This thing is built like a truck, but a truck with a big spike sticking out of the end of it. So if you were unfortunate enough to be in front of a charging Pachyrhinosaurus, it would be like standing in front of a truck that's coming at you at 25 miles an hour. The first thing you notice is this big lumpy mass on the end of its nose. We call that a boss. Well, some paleontologists believe that it housed a gigantic horn like the horn of a rhinoceros. With almost every known dinosaur, their horns are made of bone. But in the case of Pachyrhinosaurus, we think that that horn could have been made of either hair or keratin like our fingernails. And that stuff decomposes when the animal dies.
A closer study of a modern rhinoceros would reveal that their horns attach differently to the skull than they did in Pachyrhinosaurus.
We actually got specimens of rhinoceros that had passed away in zoos and looked very closely at exactly how the horn attaches to the bone. The result of that shows that the structure that we see here in this rhino is actually not what we find in Pachyrhinosaurus. It's a very different kind of structure.
Behind the boss, protecting the neck and shoulders, Pachyrhinosaurus sported its other distinguishing feature, a bony headdress called a frill.
The frills were clearly functional because, I mean, this was something that was passed on from generation to generation. It may have started off as a species recognition, sexual display mechanism, but both male and female have it. So I'm sure in the end it helped in terms of protection. If you're going to bring down a ceratopsian, you're not going to be able to get it by the neck because there's nothing to grab on there but solid bone that's this thick.
Then, by studying the bones at the site, paleontologists found another clue. This herd consisted of all ages, from the very young to full-grown adults. This cross-section gave clues of how the Arctic dinosaur's horn physically changed as they got older.
One of the things that's really interesting when we look at these nasal bosses in these different Pachyrhinosaurs is that no two are alike. They're all different. That difference would tell a lot, potentially about the animal's age, maybe about its sex, but also about its general health. These are all the kinds of parameters that animals are using to judge, whether it's a female judging a potential father for her children, or potentially males sizing each other up for battle.
Then the mystery deepened. Scientists quickly discovered that these dinosaurs had all died at the same time. Finding the remains in one place could mean only one thing. The entire herd had been wiped out suddenly and catastrophically.
Ceratopsian bone beds almost certainly all represent catastrophes. And these catastrophes only happen when the animals are moving together in herds. And in the fossil record, we see that with the ceratopsian dinosaurs, that every now and then things did go wrong. So maybe 1 in 100 of the bone beds that we find turns out to be one of these mass death sites where we have horned dinosaurs that were traveling in herds that died all at once.
But why? With the Arctic vanishing, the seasons began to change on planet Earth for the first time. This triggered a domino effect, deadly flash floods.
This is what we get if you have a lot of big animals in fast-flowing water. A single Pachyrhinosaurus could probably easily swim through even a relatively fast-moving stream. But when you get 2 or 4 or a dozen or 100 going through the water, they interfere with each other, their limbs trip each other up, and they get entangled and they drown. The force of the stream carries these bodies together and washes them up against the shoreline or at the curve of the stream. We see that today when a herd of antelope try to cross a stream at flood stage together. They get stacked up against each other. And that seems to be what happened at Pipestone Creek back in the age of dinosaurs.
The small grains of dirt surrounding the bones supported the flood theory.
Different sized grains of dirt travel at different speeds. Fast-moving water means little grains travel very quickly, bigger grains lag behind. So when they found these dinosaurs, they were completely encased in the same size grain, and that tells us that these animals were washed into their position.
But the flash flood brought up new questions. A few deaths would have been understandable. But what could have caused an entire herd of Pachyrhinosaurus to charge into a flood and certain death? Lawrence Whitmer of Ohio University conducted CAT scans on the brain case of Pachyrhinosaurus, looking for clues as to how the dinosaur may have behaved. He found that this animal wasn't overly intelligent. It operated on raw instinct.
What that small brain structure in Pachyrhinosaurus tells us is that the animals were probably not problem solvers. They didn't have the capacity necessarily to sort out what was going on in their environment. They're a very instinctual animal. So you really couldn't throw Pachyrhinosaurus a curve and have the animal deal with it. It was a very instinctual, hardwired animal.
Being an animal that reacts on instinct more than intellect, it's easy to understand how an entire herd of Pachyrhinosaurs could have been stampeded into a fast-flowing river. Because of their small brains, these dinosaurs had a shoot first and ask questions later sort of mentality.
But what Pachyrhinosaurus lacked in brains, it more than made up for in brawn. Although the brain was small, it was protected inside the dinosaur's chief weapon, an armored skull. Think of it as a prehistoric battering ram.
Ceratopsian brain cases are actually separated from their skull, which means that they can actually have a large impact on something, and it's not going to addle their brain, whether it's another dinosaur or maybe even knocking down trees, I don't know, to get to some more edibles. That massive skull is their biggest weapon, and it's what they use to defend themselves.
In a fight, Pachyrhinosaurus is going to do one thing, and that is to face its attacker. And as the attacker moves in, Pachyrhinosaurus will lower his head down and charge, and just as he hits the target, it's going to raise its head up. What this does is it thrusts the horn in and then up and rips a huge wound into the attacker.
Multiply that battering ram by as many as 1,000, And you have Pachyrhinosaurus's other big weapon, strength in numbers.
Pachyrhinosaurus was a herd dinosaur, and therefore it could operate together. The main benefits are the number of eyes available. The more eyes around, the more chance you have of seeing a predator coming. Plus, if you've got a bunch of big animals with big horns or big frills working together, they can fight off even the fiercest of predators that lived in that environment.
That environment included not only what is now Alberta, Canada, but also Alaska and Montana, where the remains of Pachyrhinosaurus have been found.
The fact that Pachyrhinosaurus is found in so many different areas suggests that these dinosaurs had a remarkable ability to adapt to a variety of different environments. It also tells us that these were migrating dinosaurs.
This Arctic dinosaur was pushed from its home by climate change and round-the-clock darkness.
During the summer months, when there was a lot of food to be had in the Arctic, because 24 hours of sunlight produces a lot of good plant material, these Pachyrhinosaurs may have moved north into the Arctic and dispersed. Fed all summer, but then the fall came. Suddenly you're facing 24 hours of darkness, so they had to get out of there. So they collected into herds again, moved south into Alberta, and then dispersed once again down there for the winter months.
Fossilized plants found at this site suggest that 75 million years ago, this creek was an ideal place for a herd of migrating Pachyrhinosaurus to come south and feed.
One of the interesting things about the Pipestone Creek locality were the evidences of plants, including some petrified wood, which generally lay beneath the bones. There was pollen, there were spores, there were leaves, and the general tenor of the plant remains was that it was a deciduous type forest.
But Pachyrhinosaurus was actually a decent swimmer. Only panic explains the mass drowning. So what could have triggered the chaos? A new discovery would reveal a ferocious apex predator nearby. It was a find that would change what we thought we knew about the Arctic prehistoric world. The discovery of one of the largest prehistoric graveyards ever unearthed revealed a killing field. An entire herd of Pachyrhinosaurus were drowned in a flash flood. What exactly drove them there? First, scientists found Pachyrhinosaurus bones that had long spiral fractures, indicating that they had been trampled in a panicked stampede. Then, they found the answer they had been searching for. Buried among the bones, they found the teeth of a predator. It was a species of tyrannosaur.
That suggested to us, well, maybe these tyrannosaur teeth are in fact from animals that are trampling the bodies of these things as they eat them. The final line of evidence came from the bones themselves, because we started finding tooth marks of tyrannosaurs on the ceratopsian bones, and there was no question at that point in time that the tyrannosaurs were definitely eating the bodies of those Pachyrhinosaurs shortly after they died.
A closer inspection of the shape of the teeth and the number of serrations pointed to the member of the tyrannosaur family that was responsible for the attack. It was the most deadly predator of its time, Albertosaurus. Albertosaurus, the lizard of Alberta, an apex predator of the tyrannosaur species. This meat-eating menace lived a few million years before its larger and better-known cousin, T-Rex.
So if T-Rex is the SUV or the Mack truck version, Albertosaurus is the sports car. The same basic design, but sleeker, more elegant, and almost certainly faster as an adult.
Albertosaurus measured 30 feet long, stood 11 feet tall at the hips, and weighed as much as 3 tons. The carnivore had 5 key tyrannosaur features that made it a fearsome predator. First and foremost, Albertosaurus possessed a powerful set of jaws and about 70 dagger-like teeth, sharp both at the point and along the sides. They were clearly used to slice through rather than crush their prey.
Their teeth are recurved, which means they sort of point backwards, and they're also very blade-like and have serrated edges. It's pretty unique because they're perfectly adapted for slicing meat, but not necessarily for crunching bone.
The second key tyrannosaur feature was binocular vision, giving it keen depth perception.
Tyrannosaurs, like Albertosaurus, generally had a very good sense of vision. A very important part of that relates to how the inner ear, the motion detectors of the head, relate to the sense of vision. And what that shows us is that Tyrannosaurs, just like Albertosaurus, would be able to move their eyes and their heads and their necks quickly to track prey.
The next key feature was a pair of short but powerful arms.
Although the arms of Albertosaurus were small compared to its overall body size, they were still packed in muscle. This meant that the arms were very strong, but their function is somewhat of a mystery. They may have been used to hold the prey as their mouth and teeth did the dirty work, or they may have been used during reproduction.
Add to that, 2 long muscular legs built to chase down prey. Some biomechanical studies have estimated that Albertosaurus could have run nearly 30 miles per hour. That's nearly the speed of a modern lion.
Albertosaurus probably was quite fast. In fact, although they lived a little bit different times, it could have potentially even outrun T-Rex. I mean, it had quite long tibiae and quite long metatarsals too in comparison to the length of the femurs, so, pretty fast animal.
At last, Albertosaurus utilized a long, tapered tail for easy maneuvering.
That tail works as a counterbalance, so they can swing their tail one way or the other while running, and that helps them turn. We even see that today in modern animals like big cats. When big cats are running, they swing their tail this way or that, and that helps them turn much more quickly.
With this package of tyrannosaur features, Albertosaurus was a master at adapting to different environments.
Most specimens of Albertosaurus we find are found only in one place in Alberta, which was a coastal plain. So we know that those dinosaurs lived in an environment very similar to what we see in the Gulf states today or northern Florida. But we have other Albertosaurus specimens from Montana now that appear to be different species, and they appear to have lived in environments that were much more inland, places that, at least seasonally, were very dry. So it may well be that although Albertosaurus lived in a wide variety of environments, in fact, it may have broke up into different species in those specific environments.
But there's another clue to how this predator lived. At a site in central Alberta, Canada, called Dry Island Bone Bed, the discovery of multiple Albertosaurus skeletons showed that this predator hunted in packs. In order to understand the hunting methods of Albertosaurus, paleontologists compared its brain design to that of modern animals.
The brain structure of Albertosaurus shows that the cerebrum, the higher centers of the brain associated with sort of cognition and problem solving, they're not tremendously large. We can look at animals today, such as crocodilians or some of the predatory lizards today, like monitor lizards, that also don't really have particularly large cerebral hemispheres. Yet they're capable of a variety of different kind of hunting styles. So it apparently doesn't take that much brain power to be a good predator. The brain structure of Albertosaurus would tell us it was able to do ambush predation. It probably had the brain power to be a pursuit predator. In other words, it could chase after its prey.
Albertosaurus had an S-shaped neck that allowed it to snap at its prey like a striking snake.
In a fight, what it would do is it would face its attacker and rush in head first with those massive teeth, and he'd grab his prey and rip a huge chunk out of it. He's not interested in wrestling with you. He simply wants to inflict an injury and let you bleed to death.
By studying the grave site, paleontologists were able to place Albertosaurus at the scene because as it was eating, it shed its teeth.
When Albertosaurus feeds, oftentimes when it reaches the bone, it can break off a tooth. We call those teeth shed teeth, meaning they're shed during the feeding process. Anytime you find shed teeth at a site where there's plant eater bones, it's a very clear indication that a meat eater was chewing on the bones. We don't find the meat eater's bones because it didn't die there. It fed and moved on. All that it left as a clue is its teeth, its shed teeth.
Scientists also believe that Albertosaurus fed on the members of the herd soon after they died, most likely after they were washed up on shore.
When we have this mass of dead bodies stinking up and rotting in the ancient Cretaceous sun, that's going to attract all sorts of predators, including the top meat eater of the time, Albertosaurus. They're going to be eating and munching, and some of their teeth, the teeth that are about to fall out because dinosaur teeth are always being renewed throughout their life cycle, are going to be left in with the bones and the rotting meat of Pachyrhinosaurus. So when we find all these shed teeth of Albertosaurus in Pipestone Creek, it shows us that the Albertosaurus were scavenging, just as any decent meat eater will do. It's meat that doesn't fight back.
But this only explains the aftermath of what happened at Pipestone Creek. It was like a prehistoric disaster movie. The Arctic dinosaurs' world was collapsing around it, and giant predators cut off every escape. It had only one choice left, and it would shock even the most seasoned paleontologists. Albertosaurus, an apex predator. Pachyrhinosaurus, a prehistoric battering ram. Two titans of the late Cretaceous period coming together as the Arctic world came to a violent end. Paleontologists pored over the remains to learn startling new facts.
Pachyrhinosaurus and Albertosaurus, they're both very large, and that large size immediately confers a great amount of strength. Neither of them were particularly delicate animals, but certainly of the two, Albertosaurus was certainly the more delicate. It had relatively long legs, and it only walked around on two of them. And so consequently, Albertosaurus was in greater danger of having catastrophic damage take place. Pachyrhinosaurus, though, was a more compact quadrupedal kind of animal, a more sturdy build than what we see in Albertosaurus.
Albertosaurus was a forerunner of the T-Rex. It had more functional arms, but its head was smaller and less powerful, so it had to use its relatively short arms to help it catch prey, a less efficient method.
Albertosaurus has these long, slender legs. It's got the shock-absorbing foot. It would have been among the fastest bipedal animals in the history of the world, at least for big animals. Pachyrhinosaurus, not so much. It would have been fast as far as a quadrupedal dinosaur goes, but that's nowhere near as much as a tyrannosaur would have been.
There are two forms of locomotion in dinosaurs. There is bipedal and quadrupedal. Quadrupeds like Pachyrhinosaurus walk on all fours. This stance gives them an advantage of being more stable, especially when they have to turn very quickly. But Albertosaurus being a biped means that it only walks on two legs. This gives them greater speed, but less stability in turning quickly.
It could turn about as quickly as a modern elephant.
See, these animals would be circling in two very different ways. The Pachyrhinosaur more or less pivoting on one spot, the Albertosaurus trying to circle and find an advantage where it could come in fast from behind or from the side and use that to its advantage.
Albertosaurus hunted in small groups of up to 5.
A herd of Pachyrhinosaurus would have been more than capable of standing their ground against a single Albertosaurus. But if there were more than one, well, that would make it considerably more difficult for the Pachyrhinosaurus. We know Albertosaurus hunted at least some of the time in packs. The fossil evidence proves that.
The Arctic was not home to any apex predators. Facing a monster such as the Albertosaurus would have been terrifying to the Arctic dinosaur, especially to the children of the pack.
It's completely possible, and in my opinion, pretty likely, that one of the hunting methods of Albertosaurus would have been to try to separate a member from the herd. Once they have it separated, then killing it's a lot easier because you don't have to contend with the entire group. This is the same technique that we see in modern predators. Animal behavior doesn't change. So we look at hunting methods of, say, a lion, and it gives us a window into the hunting methods of an Albertosaurus.
Arctic dinosaurs gathered in herds, not only for protection, but also to share body warmth.
We know, based on the geological evidence, that the herd ended up in a flooded river. But very few animals will attempt to cross a river when it's flooding. Well, we don't have the evidence that tells us exactly what happened and why these animals chose to enter the river, but something drove them into it. The only explanation I can think of is that they were forced into the river. It's certainly plausible that they were being chased into it by something as big as Albertosaurus.
The Albertosaurus could not withstand the Arctic cold. It didn't have enough fat to insulate it.
The main weapon of Albertosaurus is very powerful, bone-crushing, flesh-tearing jaws. And behind it, it's got a pretty good computer, a big brain as far as dinosaurs go, and really good senses. Great vision, great sense of smell. Pachyrhinosaurus's weapons, it's got this very powerful nose mass, whether it's a horn or a lump. That's a very good defensive weapon.
The horn of the Pachyrhinosaurus could have been as long as 3 feet. Many paleontologists think it was shaped like a rhinoceros horn, but much larger.
The test of fighting skills between the tyrant dinosaurs, like Albertosaurus on one hand, and the horned dinosaurs, like Pachyrhinosaurus at the other, that's a test of the extremes for the meat eaters and the plant eaters. The tyrannosaurs are built to kill. They're built to kill in a particular way, to come in with high speed, to come in with these super powerful jaws that can clamp, lock on, and tear. But on the flip side, the horned dinosaurs have the power of numbers, the power to operate in herds, these cranial weapons, whether they're horns or lumps. They survived against the tyrant dinosaurs pretty well.
The Pachyrhinosaurus is one of the few dinosaurs found in the Arctic. The Tamimus was found in Australia, which had once been connected to brutally cold Antarctica. This tiny biped may have been the only hibernating dinosaur.
It's possible that these animals formed into groups to protect themselves against attacks, as some large groups of mammals do today. The predators will catch the weaker ones, the laggards. They will grab off individuals in the periphery of the group, but the group as a whole is going to survive. And this is one big advantage of the gregarious nature of a lot of animals, including these dinosaurs.
Another cold-weather dinosaur was Leolinosaura, whose huge eyes could see in the dark.
We're faced with a very difficult task when trying to understand creatures that lived 70 million years ago. Behavior doesn't fossilize like bone, and so we have to look at modern animals as a way to understand how dinosaurs may have behaved. By looking closely at the evidence we do have, and by studying modern animal behaviors, we can recreate a very realistic depiction based on fact and solid science.
Albertosaurus hunted like eagles, using their feet to hold down prey and their sharp eyes to spot victims up to 3 miles away. How did these nightmarish creatures push an entire pack of Arctic dinosaurs into a flash flood? And what did this mean for the ultimate extinction of this rare creature? Scientists raced to piece together evidence that lay buried for 75 million years. 70 million years ago, Albertosaurus was the most fearsome hunter in North America. It was one of the few dinosaurs who would take on the horned Arctic dinosaur. This herd of Pachyrhinosaurus had eaten many days' worth of food to prepare for their migration. This would have slowed them down and made them sluggish.
Although Pachyrhinosaurus doesn't have the same massive size and weaponry as the other members of the ceratopsian family, they're still pretty powerful and dangerous dinosaurs. That horn can cause some fatal wounds, and the fact that they lived in herds makes them that much more dangerous. So these Albertosaurus have got to be very careful.
Albertosaurus fed on horned dinosaurs, duck-billed dinosaurs, and even the armored Ankylosaurus. They were fearless.
The behavior and hunting methods of dinosaurs like Albertosaurus were no different than those of larger predators today. Lions are a perfect example of how they'll seek out members of the herd and target the weakest for attack. These Albertosaurus know that a weak member of the herd is less likely to put up a vigorous defense, and so their chances of being injured are reduced.
Unlike many dinosaurs, the Albertosaurus wanted to chase its prey. This tired the victim and made it easier to kill.
Alerted to their presence, the Pachyrhinosaurus take up a defensive stand and begin to scan the forest for their unseen attacker. Realizing that the herd is aware of them, the Albertosaurus leave their hiding positions and move in towards the awaiting Pachyrhinosaurus.
Pachyrhinosaurus had eyes on the side of its head. Its depth perception was poor.
If they can cause the herd to stampede, they know it'll expose the weakest member. Even though these dinosaurs could stand their ground against these Albertosaurus, the Pachyrhinosaurus are hardwired to flee at the first signs of danger. By turning and running away, it exposes the weakest member. It ensures the health and well-being of the rest of the herd. This is nature's way of weeding out the sick, old, and injured.
With the breaking up of the continents, the oceans moved closer to what is now North America, causing a dramatic increase in rain.
The herd is forced to the edge of the river, but they're unable to cross, so they have to make a stand. They lower their head and thrust their nasal horns towards the predator. The Albertosaurus pace back and forth, probing for any weakness in their defense. As they circle, they take turns making mock charges in the hopes of panicking the group. They get their chance when one of the herd members breaks ranks and runs.
The Pachyrhinosaurus herds were made up of a few dominant males and a harem of females and their children.
Albertosaurus live on instinct. The moment that Pachy breaks ranks and runs for it, the predators zero in on him and give chase. The Albertosaurus knows that separated from the herd, this Pachyrhinosaurus does not stand a chance of defending himself. It's the old adage, divide and conquer.
The Pachyrhinosaurus frill was almost 3 inches thick, made of solid bone.
As he turns, the jaws of the Albertosaurus snap close on the side of his frill, and broken teeth fly into the air. The Pachy lowers his head and hopes to ram the Albertosaurus with his long nose.
The Pachyrhinosaurus could grow back its horn if it broke.
One of the weaknesses of Albertosaurus is that it's relatively lightly built. Now, looking at their size, that may seem hard to believe, but when you look at their skeletal design, you'll see that their bones are hollow. These hollow bones are rigid and strong, but they're very, very light. So if the Pachy gets lucky and hits a bone, it could break it without really any problem. And this would not only take the Albertosaurus out of the fight, it could very well end its life.
The Pachyrhinosaurus had a low center of gravity. This allowed it to pivot quickly to keep its horn and protective frill facing an attacker.
Pachyrhinosaurus, like pretty much all members of the Ceratopsian family, have no weaponry from behind their neck backwards. From their neck back, they're completely vulnerable and they have no weapons. They have no spikes, they have nothing. All of their weapons are in the front. So to attack an animal like Pachyrhinosaurus, your best bet would be to attack its unprotected side, or its flanks, or even the back of the neck behind the shield.
The skin of the Pachyrhinosaurus was up to 3 inches thick and similar in toughness to an elephant or rhino.
Once the Pachyrhinosaurus is knocked to the ground, he's basically helpless. All the Albertosaurus will need to do is grab him by the throat or rip open his belly. Those sharp serrated teeth can cut through flesh like a hot knife through butter. When you calculate the dimensions of the jaws of this big meat eater, you can see they can bite off and swallow 100 pounds of flesh in every single bite.
The Arctic was changing forever. It would go from a wasteland to a lush paradise for animals of all kind. But it would not be kind to the Arctic dinosaur. It was headed for extinction, and its demise would be vicious and painful. 70 million years ago, in what is now Canada, 2 Albertosaurus charged a herd of Pachyrhinosaurus, causing a stampede towards a flooding river. The Albertosaurus had a fast metabolism, like the birds of today. This forced it to feed frequently to replenish its energy.
Because of their lower center of gravity, dinosaurs like Pachyrhinosaurus would have been able to recover quickly from a fall. They have very powerful front and rear legs, and this makes getting back up if you fall a lot easier. As quickly as it knocked them down, it's back up on its feet again.
The Pachyrhinosaurus had legs as thick as a grown man's waist. They were also relatively dense, like the legs of an elephant, not as hollow as those of the Albertosaurus.
The thin legs of Albertosaurus are its weak spot because it wouldn't take much force to crack or even break the leg bones. But because they're relatively thin, they're a smaller target. The Pachyrhinosaurus misses the bone and only rips the skin, and this enrages the Albertosaurus, who then goes for broke.
The Cretaceous period was not as hot as the Jurassic. The temperatures were still hotter than today, but the relatively cooler climate allowed the dinosaurs to be more active. This was an advantage for the meat eaters, who expended more energy in a fight than the plant eaters. The Albertosaurus also had a cavernous stomach. It could have eaten a cow in a single meal. Its endless appetite drove it to savage butchery.
The Albertosaurus paces back and forth, pushing the herd into a tighter formation. From experience, it knows that if they're packed in too tight, then they'll lose their ability to move independently, and that's when he'll strike.
The brain of the Pachyrhinosaurus can only think of one thing at a time. They react, they do not plan. If they're focused on an attacker, they're not attuned to their environment.
One by one, the Pachyrhinosaurus are being pushed into the river as the herd moves back. Normally, these dinosaurs would be able to swim without any trouble, but now they're in panic mode, and it's every dinosaur for himself. In their struggle to get away from the Albertosaurus, they begin to drown each other.
The Pachyrhinosaurus would swim like a dog, holding its head above water and paddling with its feet. This was impossible when they were too tightly packed together. The Albertosaurus was not a good swimmer. Its small arms were useless in the water, leaving it to rely on its two powerful legs.
Even though the Albertosaurus is capable of swimming, there is no way it's going to get into a flooded river. But the side of the herd floating downstream is too much for him to ignore, so he heads off to follow the river and look for an opportunity to snatch one from the water.
The protective frill of the Pachyrhinosaurus was capable of showing color. It may have reflected the emotions of the Pachy, like a billboard.
When the Pachyrhinosaurus bodies came to the bend in the river, the momentum of the water pushed their carcasses to the outer edge of the bend. There, their bodies became intertwined with each other and started a mass pileup. Once the floodwaters receded, the exposed bodies began to rot.
At the end of the Arctic Age, floods were becoming more common. The smell of the drowned carcasses would draw predators from miles around. Some predators of that time could smell prey up to 5 miles away.
There are countless examples of modern animals that, when trying to cross a river, things can turn into sheer carnage. It happens with wildebeest, it happens with caribou. It happens time and time again. And each time it occurs, predators either cause it or show up very quickly to take advantage of it. The evidence at Pipestone Creek proves that these animals were killed in mass and then covered in mud in a bend in a river. And Albertosaurus were there to feast on the remains.
Albertosaurus and Pachyrhinosaurus eventually succumbed to extinction. The climate changes of the later Cretaceous period were the beginning of the end.
The reason why? It's probably environmental changes. It's a very tough mystery that we don't have the answer to. We know at the end of the Cretaceous period, when these two dinosaurs go extinct, something big occurs in the environment. Even as far north as Canada, environmental changes are having a pretty dramatic impact. I think these dinosaurs went extinct because they simply could not deal with the global environmental changes that were occurring at the end of the Cretaceous period.
Temperatures would continue to rise, causing dinosaurs to expend too much energy to maintain their tremendous bulk.
The real big question that we want to know about Pachyrhinosaurus is what's going on with that nose. Is there really a giant horn there, or was it just a lumpy mass? And if it's a lumpy mass, how is that mass structured? Were there ridges on it, lumps, crests? All we need is one really good specimen, and we'll know what the face of Pachyrhinosaurus really looked like.
Pachyrhinosaurus outnumbered predators by about 4 to 1, so the Albertosaurus has been found even less commonly than the Pachy. Less than 40 individual Albertosaurus have ever been found, while hundreds of Pachys have been uncovered.